we made a very big point, like you got to earn this title every day,
Hmm.
what we're doing. Um, and if you had maybe some of the younger guys might have tried to push the boundaries, I think, on some things with like, uniforms or boots or whatever. They got called out pretty quickly, where it was about like the professionalism and what we're doing. And I would say the problems we would have usually were wrapped around uniforms, especially when we're deployed, but it was usually due to support side,
Mm.
where the support side would get like super SOCOM up if they're just walking to the chow hall, like wearing stuff that we'd wear out in the field. And, we were laughing like the one time, like where I was at in Afghanistan. If you guys were at Leatherneck or Bastion, you had an Afghan 215 Corps, and then inside that you had Camp Dagger, which was where the 7th Special Operations Battalion was for the Afghans, and then inside that, that's where Camp Antonik was, where we stayed. So we would every now and then pop out and go over to the PX on Leatherneck and stuff like that. But we had other parts of like the company support and all that stuff. They would be over in an area called Camp Calero, which was kind of more the Bastion area, kind of the NATO side. And we're getting phone calls from our first sergeant, like flipping out. And he's like, damn it. He's like, you guys got to keep it together. Like you're walking around with like cuff sleeves and all this stuff. And we're like, what are you talking about? And my team chief's like, man, no, like everyone's bottled up tight here. When we go out, everyone's wearing the uniform of the day. Like, I don't get it. And eventually we found out it was like support guys that were down in Calero walking around super cool guy outfits and everything. Like every piece of gear they could find, they'll just throw it on their body. And that would paint kind of a bad image for us. Because I still believe there were just Marines on Leatherneck who just won nothing but for us to fail. Like anything they could find that we weren't 100% perfect at, they were going to call that to light and make a huge deal out of something that was relatively simple or quick correction.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, rule number one is always look cool. So
Yeah, there you go.
you have to throw all that stuff on. It just
Yep.
makes
Yes.
sense.
Yes.
Um, that's it's funny too that that's what matters. Like people are even annoyed by that. It's like we're in Afghanistan, right? Like you're worried about cuff sleeves. Like you
Exactly.
anyone that is different in any way is always a target. Like if you're not like if you're attached to a unit or you're adjacent to a unit like within a compound or something like that, and for some reason you're a little different, you're automatically a target anytime, because it's like you're not fucking special.
Yeah.
There was a guy actually that reminds me of one of the comments in the the YouTube video was talking about how there shouldn't be a MARSOC because no Marines are special, and I'm like, that's so stupid. That's such a dumb mentality to have. Then why do we have specialties? You know what I'm
Right.
saying? That's such a ridiculous thing to even say, and to maybe you can argue that we don't need MARSOC because we have recon or whatever, but they're different mission sets really, and different funding, obviously, different
Yeah.
command structures,
Hmm.
different. So, but I don't know. What are your thoughts when someone says that? When they're like, "Hey, everyone's the same." It's almost like the "everyone's a rifleman" comments you
Yeah.
hear.
I mean, I think you kind of hit it too, because these were some of the problems we were having while I was in. Like one, just getting us redesignated to be raiders. About a warfare pin. I mean, at one point, again, it was just trying to be way too PC. Like it was going to be some sort of ribbon with a skull on it, and that's going to say you were in a MARSOC unit, and we're just like, we don't need that. And it's like we just couldn't understand it because, like, listen, if you go to flight school and you become a pilot, you get something different. If you go to jump school, if you go to dive school, if you go to EOD school, like all these different schools, you get these specialties, and sometimes you wear extra flair for it.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't see what the big deal was. Um, do I think, yeah, are all Marine special? Absolutely. Is the Marine Corps a cut above all the other groups in the military? For sure. But I mean, would it really bother you? What if MARSOC was called like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something not cool, like, other operations they called it, or something
Yeah.
just very mundane. Would you really care? It's just because of the whole special ops and that name and what you kind of associate that with. And like to say, like, no, not all Marines are equal. There are some that can do certain different things. And to make these units like reconnaissance or MARSOC, And if you go in like, well, any Marine can do it. Not necessarily. If they could, everyone would be doing it. There's certain things with aptitude, with physical abilities, problem solving, a lot of different things that you get vetted out to make sure you can do this. And again, I mean, I think people look at the end state of like, not what it took to get there or what you have to do to be in those units. They kind of look at the, Marine Corps ball and you're in your dress uniform and you get to talk about the cool things you have or something like that. Where it's like, man, if you actually knew what these guys had to put into this to get here and to stay here, if you understood the missions that we had to do, where we had to do things that people might look at as impossible, and that was just another day for us. That's why I think these guys are separate, and again they proved themselves, and they should get something a little different, a little extra. That's one of my big things with retainment and recruitment. I look at how they treat MARSOC Marines or Raiders compared to SEALs and Green Berets, and especially on like the enlisted side. And it's like, listen, these are very talented people who have options. And if you want to keep them, you're going to have to keep them happy. And don't say, like, well, if you don't want to be a Marine, we don't want you. No, then you're just a bad leader. You should want to motivate people to stay with you and keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I needed to take care of that talent. And that's why, we would make sergeants live in the barracks or do all this stuff. And they're kind of like, what, like, why are the SEALs able to go out in town? Forget it. I got a college degree. I'm working on my master's. I'm gonna get out of here. I'm just gonna do something different. And then you can't turn around saying, well, why is everyone leaving? It's like, well, look at how you're treating them. And what always frustrated me with the officer side, because we always had a lot of the different officers would just hate Raiders or hate MARSOC. And I remember one guy, like, what was it? One of the teams, they came down, they're in Leatherneck. They had their Humvee. It was stupid. They walked away, and I guess like they had like one of their attachments was supposed to watch a vehicle, and he got distracted and walked over to PX or something. So when they came out, it's like an unmanned vehicle, and all hell broke loose. And he's like, we got like majors and lieutenant colonels calling on our vehicle, dismounting our 50 cal, like just going beyond like what they should have been doing, yelling at us, and they just kind of, I don't get it. I don't get you guys. I don't know why we have you guys. And I'm like, you're a Marine officer. You're supposed to get it. And I'm not saying like, hey, these are Raiders, accept it. You're supposed to be a critical thinker, and you should actually understand what these units' capabilities are and why you have them. Because I imagine at some point you're working for promotions. And, if you're on the combat arms side, you might ultimately have special operations guys you might not be in control of, but you can utilize their asset or their capabilities to go accomplish your mission. And that's going to better help your entire unit and the overall mission as it is. I had a really cool operations officer when I was at Recon. This guy, I think he's a colonel. Wouldn't surprise me he's going to be general one day, E.J. Healy. And, he was a major at the time, but like Major Healy, he was straight up Marine Corps infantry. Like he loved the infantry. He, had the haircut, everything. And he would just make fun of us in a joking way. He was like, oh, you cool recon guys, all that stuff. But, I'll never forget, he was in charge of 1st Battalion, was it 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, I think. And we were over in Afghanistan at the same time. And I get a call in our operations center, and it's Major Healy or Colonel Healy at the time. And he kind of calls me up and he's like making a joke about me, like cool MARSOC guys, and how long's my hair and my blouse and my boots, just like just having fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, listen, I'm calling you because I want to. I'm kind of asking for a favor, and I just want to see if you're into it. And I'm like, sure. And they were in Marja, and people know Marja is a really bad area. And he's like, we're having a little tough time down here. And he's like, and I'm just tired of watching Lance Corporals hit IEDs and all this stuff. And he's like, and I know the axe that you guys wield. And I would love to have a commando mission come into Marja and give us some breathing room so we could set up some other checkpoints and do some stuff. And I was like, hey, not my call, but I'm all for it. Let me see what I can do. And I remember I hung up the phone and I kind of took just sat back in my seat. My team chief looked at me. He goes, what was that all about? I'm like, the United States Marine Corps just called us up asking for support. And he was like, no shit, and I'm like, absolutely. And we briefed it, we were going to do some cool stuff, and it got shot down because they just had us focus on some other areas. But I said to myself, I'm like, Colonel Healy gets it. Like, he put aside his ego. He's not gonna be like, oh, we're all Marines, we're all special. He's like, no, these guys can do certain things, have certain authorities, come with certain assets that could really help us achieve our overall mission down here and give us a little breathing room. And that's why he's a good Marine officer. He never stopped learning.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you don't understand the assets that are supporting you, man, your decision making is hindered. The odds of having positive results have gone down. I remember when I was the I was the fires chief for 3-6 in Marja, and I think it was Kilo Company's CO or whatever at the time down south. There wasn't a lot going on, and he had no want to deal with fires people for whatever reason. Yeah. And I remember he took my scout. So the way it works, for those that don't know, is like I was with 210 at the time. I put together a fire support team. 3-6 is getting ready to deploy, so we attach to them. Each company gets a officer and an 0861, a forward observer, and a radio operator. And then normally the forward observer gets attached to the line units and goes out on patrols and does all that stuff, them and the radio operator. And the officer helps with fire support planning and stuff within the company COC. And they took their radio operator off radio watch, like their headquarters radio operator, and sent him down to the line company and put my FO as the radio watch for the FSC, or for the COC, the command center, and just didn't want him to do any kind of fires planning. I'd be like, hey, I'd be briefing, and they just didn't care. And then nothing was going on down there. And then towards the end of the deployment, something happened. And I remember he called my phone. I was in the 3-6 command center. He called my phone direct, and I picked it up, and I was like, 3-6 Fires, Sergeant Kramer. And he's like, hey, this is Captain so-and-so. Can you put up one of those like goalposts or whatever? Like talk. And I'm like, dude, it's what you put up for a HIMARS shot. And yes. I'm like, sir, we're already on it. Like, if you'd open up your Merc Fires channel, like, I'm updating everything there. I understand what's going on. And I was just like, dude, like, you are hurting yourself by not like understanding the assets that are underneath you. It's just crazy.
It really is. And it's like embarrassing to hear that. I mean, man, especially too, what you can do on the fire side, but that's, that's one thing I kind of did regret a little bit about getting out of the Marine Corps. Because we were still at that time where like officers were doing 5 years and they sent us back to whatever our MOS was, and then we would come back to MARSOC, and they rightfully so changed that. But they were going to send me to like an Army's like captain's careers course or something like that, and then didn't really know where I was going to go at that point. And again, like there's just other factors, and I'm like, it's just I just don't feel like doing that. But they did bring up, what if we got you to the basic school? And you could be an instructor, do an instructor gig at infantry officer course. And I kind of like regretted a little bit about not doing that, because you want to have that influence on those impressionable officers where you talk about intellectual curiosity and like, things are going to constantly change. And especially in the Marine Corps, you can just fall into a rut where like someone's like, oh, that stuff's lame. We don't do that stuff. And you're like, yeah, forget artillery. Who needs that?
Yeah.
And you just dad dump it. And then I think it gets to a point where you don't utilize the asset because mainly you have no idea what the heck it is. But then two, internally, you're embarrassed because you don't know what it is and you don't want to ask for that help. And it's okay if like you sit down and say, hey, Staff Sergeant Kramer, I don't understand this goalpost thing. Can you explain to me why we're doing this and like how it would be set up? And that's, Marines love to do that. Like, yeah, let me show you what I do. We would send guys to the 18 Bravo course, which is like a weapons course for special forces. And, we come back and we'd be hitting the range. Yeah, I can go up to a Ma Deuce or a 240 and I know what I'm doing, but I'm like, wait a minute. We just sent you to a school to learn this stuff. You tell me how to do this and see what else I can learn from you. And you can see the excitement in them. And usually you did pick up a couple different tricks that they learned along the way. So that's where I think you see a little bit of the ego with some officers, and you see it with like senior enlisted where they don't want to admit, I don't know what I'm doing, and they can really cost their Marines by not just raising their hand saying, hey, I need a quick hip pocket class or something like that. I mean, one of my most kind of eye-opening hip pocket classes was from then staff sergeant. He ended up getting out as a master sergeant. This guy, Brian Jacklin, Navy Cross recipient, all that. But Brian was a JTAC, and I mean, listen, he knew a lot about air to ground munitions. So while we were at our final exercise, we got word, new directive came down that the Griffin missiles were now put at ground force commander level, which is great. And, you know, guys look those things up. I mean, they're GPS guided little missiles on high def TV. I mean, you can do a lot of awesome things with those. And I'm like, I'd never really even used GIF. Like, I never deployed them before. I don't really understand it. So I was just walking outside my hooch and I saw Brian and I'm like, hey, can I ask you a question? And he's like, yeah, what's up? I'm like, and I told him about the Griffins, and he's like, "Oh man, those are now ground force level." And he's like, "I'm like, yeah." I'm like, "Well, tell me how you would use this stuff." He goes, "Cool." And we just get down on our knees and brush aside some dirt. And I got a great class from Brian on air to ground munitions, and we utilized the Griffins like it was cool. I mean, that was like our primary thing when we had a daytime AC 130 variant. We were rocking and rolling with that thing, killing a lot of bad guys. And I could have sat there and been like, "I'm a captain, I know everything," and
Yeah.
never or I could have just accepted, hey, I need some help. I need to learn this. Let me go talk to someone about it. And it just was another tool in the toolkit for the team.